When our worlds collided, it wasn't fate or destiny. It was karma, quietly walking in wearing the face of coincidence. He thought he could measure my worth in hours, in salaries, in silence. He didn't know I carried a story heavier than gold, one that would force him to look at the wreckage he left behind and finally see himself. So no, this isn't a story about a billionaire finding love. It's about a man who thought he was untouchable, learning that the heart he'd ignored all his life was the only thing that could save him or destroy him. And as for me, I didn't walk into his world to be loved. I walked in to remind him that even the powerful bleed when the truth finally reaches them. They say the easiest way to destroy a man is to walk right into his life without him realizing it. That's exactly what I did. But to understand why, you need to know this. I didn't take that job because I needed money. I took it because I needed justice. His name was Ethan Crowell. To the world, he was a visionary, the kind of man magazines called a modern-day king. But to me, he was the reason my sister never came home. She used to work for his company, bright, hopeful, always believing that good people rise if they work hard enough. Then one night, her car spun out on a highway because of a faulty part his company knew about and never recalled. They blamed her for it, said it was driver error. The file was closed, the press was silenced, and he moved on like nothing happened. I never did. When I walked into his office for the first time, I could feel my pulse hammering under my skin. He didn't even recognize my last name. Why would he? To him, my sister was just a line in a report. I kept my face calm, my tone soft, my resume polished. He looked at me once, and in that brief second, I saw everything: arrogance, charm, and that effortless kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He hired me on the spot, said he liked people who didn't waste his time. For weeks, I blended in, just another employee, with a polite smile and quiet eyes. I memorized the way he moved, the words he used to manipulate rooms full of men who feared him and women who adored him. Every morning, I brewed his coffee. Every night, I stayed late, pretending to be loyal, pretending to care. But underneath my calmness, there was a storm. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at his reflection in the glass wall of his office, wondering how someone could live so easily after ruining so many lives. I'd remind myself, he doesn't know who you are. Don't give him the power of recognition. There were moments, though, when I saw something flicker in him, a hesitation, a tiredness he tried to hide behind expensive suits and sharp words. Maybe guilt, maybe exhaustion. But I didn't care. My mission wasn't to understand him. It was to dismantle him. At night, when the office was empty and quiet, I'd open old archives. I'd find names, dates, memos, proof of everything they buried. And every time I read his signature at the bottom of a document, my hands would tremble. My sister's death wasn't an accident. It was an order signed in ink. And as I stood under those cold fluorescent lights, one thought echoed in my head like a heartbeat. You don't even know I'm here, Ethan. But I'm already closer to you than anyone else ever will be. Because I wasn't there to work. I was there to watch him fall. If revenge is an art, invisibility is the brush. I learned quickly that in a place like his company, power isn't loud. It's quiet, calculated, and unseen. So I made myself invisible, the kind of employee who never caused problems, never asked questions, never stood out. The kind of woman men like Ethan Crowell forget about the moment they leave the room. Every morning, I greeted him with a smile that wasn't mine. Every evening, I stayed long after the lights dimmed, cleaning up his chaos while memorizing every word, every document, every careless confession he let slip between meetings. He trusted efficiency, not empathy, so I became efficient. He liked obedience, not emotion, so I gave him silence. At first, he barely noticed me. I was just the new assistant, the one who handled the boring tasks others avoided. But power has a habit of noticing what it depends on. Slowly, he began to see me, not as a person, but as a convenience he couldn't function without. "You're good," he'd say, handing me another pile of files. better than most. Inside, I'd smile at the irony. Of course I'm better, Ethan. I studied you long before you met me. Weeks turned into months. I learned the company's secrets, the way a thief learns a house before breaking in. I discovered his patterns, the meetings he avoided, the people he feared, the topics that made his jaw tighten. I saw how easily he shifted blame when deals went wrong, how quickly he bought silence when someone got too close to the truth. Then one night, when he was away on a business trip, I stayed behind to finish some urgent reports. That's when I found it. An old digital archive labeled under a fake project name. Inside were confidential memos about defective parts, internal warnings, and one chilling phrase that stopped my breath. Suppress external communication regarding fatal incident. My sister's case. Her name wasn't written, but the date was enough. I stared at the screen, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I felt a rush of grief, anger, and something darker. A satisfaction that my instincts were right. They knew, they had always known, and Ethan had been the one to sign off on it. For the first time, I saw his empire for what it truly was, not built on innovation or brilliance, but on silence. The silence of the people who trusted him, the silence of families like mine. I printed everything, stored it, memorized every detail. I wasn't ready to strike, not yet. Because revenge, if done too early, only wounds. But if done right, it destroys. So the next morning, I showed up to work as usual, coffee in hand, eyes calm, voice steady. He smiled at me and said, "You're a lifesaver." And I thought to myself, no, Ethan, I'm just your lesson. The one you don't see coming. The more time I spent around Ethan, the more dangerous the game became. Not because he suspected anything, but because he started to see me. Not as an employee, not as a name on his schedule, but as a person. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. It began with small things. A question about my weekend. A cup of coffee left on my desk. A compliment that sounded almost human. I'd laugh politely, keeping my distance, but every time his eyes lingered on me, a little longer, I felt my stomach twist, because I knew what he didn't, that behind my smile lived a secret meant to end him. But Ethan had a strange kind of charm. He could switch from ruthless to gentle in the blink of an eye. I saw him talk investors into giving him millions, then turn around and console an employee whose job he'd cut minutes earlier. He was a walking contradiction, capable of warmth, yet hollow on the inside. One night after a long day, he asked me to stay and help finalize a presentation. I agreed. It was just work, I told myself. But as hours passed and the city lights painted gold streaks across the glass walls, something shifted. He started talking, not about business, but about himself, about how he built everything from nothing, about the people who betrayed him, about trust. He spoke with such sincerity that for a brief, dangerous moment, I forgot who he was. His voice softened, his guard lowered, and I saw not the monster who buried my sister's truth, but a man who carried his own scars. Scars he hid beneath ambition. But then he said something that turned my blood cold. He mentioned a car recall from years ago, brushed it off like it was a simple business adjustment. He didn't even realize he was talking about her, my sister, the error that cost her life. I smiled to hide the tremor in my voice, asking harmless questions while inside, a storm raged. He had no idea that every word he said was another drop of gasoline on the fire I'd been building. Still, after that night, something inside me changed. I started dreaming about my sister again, her laugh, her warmth, her faith in people. And I hated myself for feeling anything but rage. Because the more human Ethan seemed, the harder it became to separate the man from the monster. He began to trust me more, to rely on me. Sometimes I caught him looking at me like I was more than just his assistant. And that scared me, not because of him, but because a small part of me wondered what it would have been like to meet him before the lies, before the blood on his hands. But then I'd remember her face, her last message, her hope that truth always wins. And that hope became my armor again. Because Ethan Crowell wasn't a man finding redemption. He was a man walking straight into his reckoning. He just didn't know I was the one leading him there. It happened on a night like any other. Quiet, harmless, unassuming. Ethan had left early for a meeting, and I stayed behind to finish reports. But in truth, I was chasing ghosts, the kind that hid in data, encrypted folders, and buried memos. I'd searched before, but this time, I found something different. Buried under a mislabeled archive, I found a folder titled Project Kestrel. The name meant nothing until I opened it. There it was, the chain of emails, internal memos, reports from engineers warning about a defect in the car model, the same one my sister drove. My breath hitched when I saw his name at the bottom of every document. Approved by Ethan Crowell. He'd known from the beginning. I scrolled through the pages, my hands shaking as I read lines that felt like knives. Public exposure may damage brand trust. Minimize liability through settlement agreements. Driver negligence will serve as cover. Every word stripped away, another layer of humanity from him. And then, buried deeper, a message he sent personally. Ensure the family is pacified. We don't need another headline, pacified. That's what my sister's life was to him. A problem to be pacified. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't stop reading. I couldn't. I downloaded everything, saved it to a drive I kept hidden under the lining of my purse. And for the first time since I stepped into his world, I let myself cry. Not out of grief, but release. The truth was mine now. When I looked at his picture framed on the office wall, the confident smile, the perfect suit, I felt nothing but resolve. All the charm, the apologies, the quiet glances, they were nothing more than masks. He wasn't haunted by guilt. He was protected by arrogance. As I shut down the computer, I whispered to the empty room, "You'll remember her name soon, Ethan." Because in that moment, I knew what came next wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Not the kind written in law books, but the kind carved into the soul of every person who ever lost something to the powerful and got silence in return. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the storm he never saw coming. After that night, something inside me hardened. I stopped seeing Ethan as a man and started seeing him as a system, one built on other people's pain. Every smile he gave, every deal he signed, felt like another insult to my sister's memory. But now I finally held the one thing he couldn't buy or bury. The truth. Revenge doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in steps, carefully placed like glass beneath someone's feet. My first step was to earn his full trust. I started anticipating his needs before he spoke, finishing his sentences, making myself indispensable. He began calling me his right hand, sometimes even his only friend. If only he knew how right he was. I was the only one close enough to destroy him. At night, I built a trail. One file at a time, I sent pieces of evidence to anonymous sources, journalists, regulators, ex-employees who still had a conscience. I used burner phones, hidden accounts, false timestamps. It wasn't enough for him to lose money. I wanted him to lose the illusion of control. Then one evening, he called me into his office. His face was pale, his voice trembling. "There's been a leak," he said. "Someone inside's been feeding information to the press." I looked at him, feigning shock, my heart steady. "That's awful. Do you think someone close to you might be involved?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know who to trust anymore." I smiled gently. "You can trust me." And he did. Oh, he did. The next few weeks were chaos. The media exploded with headlines. Lawsuits piled up. Shareholders demanded answers. Ethan's empire, the same one that once looked untouchable, began to crumble, inch by inch. I watched him unravel in real time. The sleepless eyes, the panic in his tone, the way he clutched at control, like a drowning man grasping air. He never suspected me. He couldn't. To him, I was too loyal, too quiet, too harmless. But that was his mistake, confusing silence for innocence. And as I watched him drown in the very lies he built, I thought of my sister, her laughter, her faith, her belief that the truth always wins. It does. It just needed a voice willing to whisper it from within the walls he built. The morning the world turned on him, the city felt different, thinner, like the air had been peeled away to expose everything underneath. I arrived at the office with a calm I almost didn't feel. My hands were steady because I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. He walked in like a man who still believed in his invincibility, flanked by assistants and lawyers, clutching a morning paper as if it were armor. The headlines screamed at the top, "Defective parts, cover-up, CEO under scrutiny." His face froze in a way I'd never seen. Not rage, not charm, just a raw, animal fear. Meetings collapsed into chaos. Phones rang without end. Investors who once begged to be in his presence suddenly wanted answers. Lawyers circled like vultures, and regulators called terms I'd only heard behind closed doors. I watched him move through it all, bewildered, grasping for control that kept slipping through his fingers. His voice, once smooth and certain, fractured into jagged sentences. He asked for facts. He demanded loyalty. He looked at me more than once, eyes hunting for something steady. I stayed composed. I handed him files. I gave him the same smile I always did. Inside, I felt nothing but a quiet, precise satisfaction. When the first subpoenas arrived, the room smelled like paper and defeat. A friend of his, once loyal, now terrified for his own skin, turned on him in a deposition. Names were called aloud, memos were quoted, and the very language he used to bury the truth was used to dig his grave. I held my breath as his empire, the one he built by silencing others, began to splinter because silence had finally been broken. Watching him crumble, without lifting a finger, felt cleaner than any act of violence. It was truth doing the work. At one point, he wandered to my desk as if looking for an anchor. He hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need you to stay," he said, voice thin. There it was, that instinctual reach for the familiar. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to tell him that the wrongs he'd done couldn't be smoothed over with apologies. I wanted to tell him how my sister's absence was a constant ache he never felt. But words would only have been indulgence. Instead, I looked at him and said softly, "You always needed someone to hold your mess together." He flinched like I'd struck him. By evening, cameras were outside the building. By night, statements were released. The man who once made others tremble now trembled when he spoke. I walked out of that building under the same sky he'd once thought bent to his will, and I felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because the scale had finally tipped. Justice hadn't been loud, it had been inevitable. And as for him, watching the man who believed himself untouchable, brought low by his own choices, I realized the truth had a way of making even the strongest reckon with what they'd done. After the storm came silence. Not peace, just silence. The kind that follows after something has broken so completely, it can't make sound anymore. The news moved on to fresher scandals. The world found new names to idolize and destroy. But for me, the quiet was louder than ever. Ethan Crowell's empire was gone. The company restructured under new leadership. His assets were frozen, and he disappeared from the skyline he once owned. Some said he left the country. Some said he was living quietly in a coastal town, trying to rebuild. I didn't care. For me, his absence was enough. Still, victory didn't feel like I thought it would. I had imagined standing over the ruins of his kingdom, feeling vindicated, powerful even. But standing there, outside the office that had once been his throne, I only felt empty. Revenge doesn't fill the holes grief leaves. It just quiets the echo for a while. I took the evidence I'd gathered and handed it over completely. Every file, every document, every lie. I didn't want his downfall to live in my hands anymore. It belonged to the truth now, and the truth didn't need me to keep holding it hostage. Days turned into weeks. I started sleeping again, eating again, living again. And one evening, I went back to the place I had avoided for years, my sister's grave. The grass had grown over the stone, soft and green. I sat down beside it, the wind cold against my skin. And for the first time, I spoke aloud. "It's done. He remembers you now." The words cracked something open in me. I realized I hadn't been fighting just for her. I'd been fighting to forgive myself for surviving when she didn't. Before I left, I placed my old company badge on her headstone. The name beneath the logo, mine, felt strange now. That woman, the one who entered Ethan's world full of vengeance, didn't exist anymore. What was left of me wasn't fueled by hate, but by something quieter, closure. As I walked away, I glanced at the horizon. Then, the city lights shimmered like distant memories, fading one by one. And I thought, maybe justice isn't about seeing them fall. Maybe it's about finally being able to stand again. They say time heals everything, but I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal, it reveals. It shows you who you've become after the fire, what you're capable of once the pain stops defining you. I didn't destroy Ethan Crowell for revenge anymore. I did it because truth deserved a voice, even if it spoke through me. Some nights I still think about him, not with anger, not even pity, just understanding. He thought power could hide him from consequence, but karma doesn't need permission to find its way home. It always does. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: silence isn't weakness, it's waiting. Waiting for the right moment to turn truth into justice. So if you've ever been broken, ignored, or silenced, remember, karma never forgets the ones who suffer quietly. If this story made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every person still waiting for their truth to be heard. Because sometimes, the quietest voices echo the loudest when the world finally decides to listen.